Hey everyone, my name is Jonathan, and welcome to Construction Marketers. Normally, in these types of situations, I like to either create content myself, whether it's talking head video similar to what I'm doing now, which is what I first started off doing, or I've been doing podcast interviews recently, and this is actually my first solo episode. It's less structured than my prior videos that I've made. I say that to say, please have a lot of grace for me as I begin to go through this entire process here today. This is very new to me to be able to talk directly into a camera to discuss a few topics. But without further ado, so basically, there's two things I want to cover today from a content marketing, social media, personal brand perspective. So the first piece is talking about content creation burnout and how I almost quit. And then the second piece is basically a response to a question I was asked on LinkedIn about personal branding. This is a personal DM. I won't say who this individual was that asked this question, but I figured sharing my response to not just this individual, but sharing my response to you might actually be helpful as well. So without further ado, let's go ahead and begin. Before I begin to share my experience and how I almost quit it all, I want to kind of set the stage or tell the story that kind of led me to this point. So, for those of you that don't know, that are new to construction marketers, I started this back in September of 2023. I had a loose idea as far as what I was doing, and have been creating content, both long form and short form video content from all the short form content's coming from the long form content. And so I've done that and it's been good. Like it's been, I'm seeing growth. I'm seeing momentum. I'm seeing things start to move in the right direction, after several, maybe 8, 9 months of doing this whole process. But it was about a month ago, and I was headed to actually go grab dinner for me and my wife. And, normally when I'm by myself, that gives me the freedom to be able to listen to whatever I want, which in this case are business or content creation podcasts, which may not always appeal to my wife. So when she's in the car, we'll typically listen to music, things like that. So in this case, I had the opportunity to listen to a podcast of some sort. So I'm scrolling YouTube before I go drive, pick up our dinner. And then I stumble upon this video by this content creator gal. Her name is Vanessa Lau. And the title, I can't remember exactly what it was, but she basically said she was a 7-figure content creator and quit for a year. And basically, this was her explanation after a full year of quitting content and doing that. She was sharing her story as to why she ended up going in that route or going that way. So I'm listening to this podcast and I'm just so intrigued by what she's saying, her experience, the little, like the red flags, the different things that were going on in her life that kind of led her to that point. And so for me, I just think naturally my ear was I was just leaning in more and more as I heard it. And even too, when I went to go pay for my food, I put my AirPods in, just listening to this still. I'm like, wow, like this is just super convicting. Like I'm like, this seems like she's talking directly to me. And basically, so that happened. I listened to that and that just kind of lingered in my mind. And then fast forward a few weeks later, I'm tired, I'm overwhelmed, I'm stressed, I'm anxious, I'm all those emotions together. And I begin to go down this mental path. I'm like, hey, should I quit it all? Should I quit what I'm doing, both from the business side? And for those of you that don't know, I have my own social media marketing agency helping commercial contractors build their brand online. So that was my agency. But also too, I have construction marketers as well, which I've been building for some time now. And I just realized there was a certain point where I'm just like, man, I'm just tired. And I felt very similar to Vanessa in this video. And if I remember, I'll put the actual YouTube video in the comment or in the description so you guys can check it out. It's a 40-minute video, but it's a really good watch. A lot of nuggets in there. But one of the things I could relate to her story or her situation a lot of was it seemed as though I've been giving of more and more of myself. Like this is the same exact thing she was saying as well, and just giving more and more of herself, and it just became too much. And some of the themes that really stuck out to me from this talk that she had, and relating back to me why I wanted to quit, was she was overcommitting. So she started creating content, and then eventually she started doing these cohorts, and then eventually she started doing coaching, and then she started doing public speaking. She started to do so many different things where eventually she just kind of became, for lack of better words, a slave to to the business, to the content creation process, to the creator life, all that sort of stuff. And for me, I, once I watched that and heard that video, I began to self-reflect. I've been growing my business for some time, for several years now, mainly all by myself, for the most part. And sometimes it's gotten out of hand. Sometimes there's been highs and lows, and so you just have to get used to that. And I think in general, that like being a business owner is tough because some days you're just like, man, this isn't it. Like I'm like I don't want to do this, and then other days you're like, man, I can't believe I would ever think of doing something completely different from this. Um, so that's the first thing is I have a business. But the other thing though is I started creating construction marketers, which is where you guys are listening or hearing me on today. And I'd created, like I said, one video per week, and I had all these clips that I was creating. So, and just for more context for you guys, I don't want to bore you guys with the details, but I think it's important to know, especially for a content burnout sort of podcast episode episode. For one video, so if you guys go look at my videos that I did, the talking head videos myself, me kind of, breaking down a specific topic, things like that, it was taking me about 8 to maybe 10 hours per week on that. Like to be able to write all the content, script it out, record it, edit it, chop up all the videos and edit those, title them, schedule them, distribute, all that sort of stuff. That was about 8 to 10 hours per week. And so you can only imagine, like, over the span of a month, that's 40 hours. That's about it could be about 30 something hours to almost 40 hours of content. And so for me, you just begin to think of that on top of my business that I'm growing, operating, and running. That's a lot of extra time allocated. And so for me, I'm just like, okay, like I need to find a better way to do this. And that's where, to be honest, where the Construction Marketers podcast or interview side came about, was because I just realized I'm like, okay, how do I make this enjoyable for myself? How do I make this better? And so I began to do that process. And so now I have the construction podcast side now, and that takes anywhere between maybe 3-4 hours a month. Per episode, with editing and all that sort of stuff, and preparing and scheduling, all these sort of things. And so for me, I was just starting to think of all the commitments, things I was doing with my business. And also to just year to date for this year has been super busy with business, like, which is a good thing. It's just more sales opportunities, more clients, all that sort of stuff. But then having to navigate also to the side of Construction Marketers, which is a side project from all this. And so we have that. And then I think it was about maybe a month ago as well, I was talking with an construction executive, and he mentioned we've been talking about this for years, starting a podcast together. And so that eventually got brought up, and I'm like, okay, yeah, this is awesome. Like, it's exciting. And you can just see quickly, I have my own business, I have Construction Marketers, and then I have this potential of this podcast. And for me, I'm just like, oh gosh. And then also too, just outside of that, I have personal life stuff. Like I have other commitments. I have a lot of other commitments outside of work, and just my schedule is just like, I have no margin. Like there's just no breathing room. And just having to do it all myself. And basically, finally, I think it was like a month ago, everything, maybe a little over a month ago now, it hit me. And I'm just like, man, I want to quit. I want to quit it all. And initially, I actually didn't know where that thought or idea came from. But now, as I was preparing for this specific talk today that I'm having with you guys, I was reminded of the video that I saw, and I could relate a lot to this gal, even though she's far more successful, far more accolades, has maybe better reasons why she deserved a year off. And I'm just like, you know what? I remember sitting down on my dining room table with my wife, and I'm like, I think I'm done. Like, I think I'm tired. I'm exhausted, even with my business. For more context, like I haven't taken a vacation in a few years now, like an actual vacation. And even the vacations I take are only a few days, maybe 3-4 days. And I'm not saying these things. I just want you guys to know that I'm not saying these things for your sympathy or be like, hey, like you feel bad for me. No, like I signed up for this. Like I'm a grown adult running my own business, but I just want to be honest as far as like the magnitude of the weightiness of what I'd been going through. And yeah, and so I sat down, I told my wife I'm done, and like I started to think, I'm like, and the idea of, okay, what else? I'm like, maybe I get a job, maybe I just go in-house somewhere and just lay low for a little bit so I can get myself back in order and feel like a breath of fresh air. And yeah, and so I ended up, pondering some of these things with my wife. And even too, the last thing I'll add is like I felt like I was kind of a slave to content creation too. Like obviously that's the whole theme of this podcast or what we're talking about today is burnout. And like even the LinkedIn content I was creating, like that was a lot as well, like several hours a week of my time to be able to do that. And so finally I'm like, I'm done. And it's a tricky situation, especially for my wife, because I'm just laying all these things out to her, and she's just like, "Whoa, what's going on right now?" And it's like, what is about to change? And I just knew I had to get it out. Like it was all in my head, and finally I had to get it out there. And I've been saying I've been tired for a little bit now, but I just never actually took action or did anything about it. So after thinking about it through, I had my counselor talk to my counselor. That was super helpful. Obviously, I talked to my wife, which is incredibly helpful for her to listen to me. And then eventually, I scheduled a session with my executive coach. So I have an executive coach, and I decided to take a break for this quarter, and basically just start like I was meeting with him monthly, and now I'm meeting with him quarterly. And so I scheduled a session with him and actually made it a 2 hour session like right away. And so we ended up meeting, and I just told him all this, and basically kind of helped me really understand. Like obviously it was a 2 hour session, it was super helpful, but he just really the biggest theme I'll leave with you guys from that conversation was, Jonathan, just because you can do it doesn't mean you have to do it. And I think my inability to say no to things is super tough. Like, I don't think I'm a people pleaser. I definitely, I have selfish ambition for sure. I can be very selfish in what I do and why I do it. But when somebody says, "Hey, do you want to do this?" or "Hey, what are your thoughts?" Like, it's just easy for me to say yes. And my wife would just be like, "Hey, why are you saying yes to that? Like, why are you?" And so I just have it's hard for me to say no. And so my inability to say no, as well as knowing that, hey, just because I can do this, just because it is a good idea, just because I have the capability of doing it, that doesn't mean I should, especially if I don't have the margin. And so now I'm in the process of scaling that back, like as far as like figuring out what exactly the next steps are going to be for me. And that's what I want to share here next. But I just really want to drive the point home that, content creation, construction marketers, even customer growth, what I'm doing there, like I just gotten so tired, and I wanted to quit it all. But the good news is that I'm not. And what I want to share next is the changes that I've made specifically from a content perspective that are going to allow for me to have more longevity, enjoy the process more, find ways to create more margin, maybe outsource some things like that, that allow for me to do more of what I love. Because the reality, and I want you guys to know this, I love creating content. If I could just do this every single day, like literally just create my own content, talk about what I want, whether it's through LinkedIn, YouTube, short form video content, podcast, like if I could just do this all day, this is what I would love to do. So, but the unfortunate truth was that that wasn't the situation I was in. Like I was in a very different situation. So with that said, I want to transition now to kind of share with you guys and share some more insight as far as, what I'm doing now from a content perspective for longevity. That way I mitigate burnout. And the reality is like the biggest theme is I just need to figure out how to scale things back more, say no to more things. And for those of you that don't know, I am currently saying no to a lot of networking calls. So like I was saying a yes to a lot of those things, and I'm just like, okay, I'd love to, but I just don't have the margin. And I would just constantly say yes. So now I've kind of had to like put a stop to it, which, in a sense is a bummer for me because I love connecting with new people all the time. But the reality is like, okay, Jonathan, like, are you going to give of yourself so much where there's nothing left for you and you're just kind of left dry? So yeah. So here is what I'm going to be doing now is the first piece And this relates to my personal brand. So for those of you, and I know most of you probably know that I'm on LinkedIn often, but for those of you that don't know, I post a lot of my actual individual thought leadership, opinions, things like that on my personal LinkedIn page, Jonathan Core on LinkedIn. That's where I post all my content. And that's where I started, quite frankly, like this whole journey of content creation. That's where it started for me. It's grown, but now I'm diversifying onto other platforms. But the first thing I'm doing is trying to find ways to leverage the content that I already have. So I mentioned to you guys that I had been recording now, what is it, 7, 8 months now. So since September 2023, I have videos that I've created, and I have tons of clips for each of these videos. And one of the things I was doing for the most part was posting those content on each of the construction marketers YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. But I was rarely leveraging any of it for my own content, like for my actual personal brand content. And I began to think, I'm like, oh, that's weird. Like I should begin leveraging this for my own content. So that's the first thing I'm going to begin doing from a content perspective, is really looking at what do I have right now? What do I have access to already? And then how do I milk that more and use it on social media? Because the reality is, for LinkedIn and YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, all those platforms, like I have different audiences on there, different people that follow me. There may be some crossover there, but the reality is, like, those are different for each of those platforms. And the same can be said about my personal brand. So just because people saw it on the Construction Marketers LinkedIn page doesn't mean they saw it or are following it, or maybe they missed that day. And so for me, trying to leverage those clips again in my actual content cadence is going to create more, it's going to allow for me to create more better content, but just making it way easier and leveraging what I already have. So that's one way I'm doing. And hopefully that gives you guys an idea, is like, hey, what content do I have access to that I'm already creating, or that I can leverage and pull onto? Maybe it's your personal brand, or maybe vice versa, from your personal brand to your company brand, that sort of stuff. The other thing I'm doing as well is finding ways to repurpose older but great content. This one's a little tough for me specifically, and I'll share why. So if you guys follow some of the biggest creators out there, like the Justin Welsh's, there's this, I can't remember what this other guy's name is, maybe Daniel Abraham or something. There's a lot of these bigger content creators out there who have huge followings, but once you see their content, you kind of, they do a really good job of repurposing, talking about the same thing, and maybe waiting out 90 days, and then they'll, repost the same thing that they posted again. And it works. Like if a post blew up, 3 months ago, it's likely it could probably blow up again. So you use it again. The hard part for me as a creator is I felt like that was kind of like cheating. I'm like, okay, no. Like I need to think of something brand new, something innovative, something that nobody's ever thought of. And that needs to be my standard as a creator. The reality is that's a lot harder. It's easier said than done. So I now have a catalog of several years of content. I would say that maybe the past 2 years are probably the most relevant. That realistically, all this content is all fresh content that I've had for the past, 2 years. And I think for me to be able to go back and find those posts and figure out, okay, what were some of my top performing posts, as well as what are some posts that I really liked maybe back then, but I just didn't have a big enough audience where it didn't resonate, or maybe I can add more content or context to it, or maybe I can trim it down, or maybe I can do all these sort of things. And so that's what I begun the process of doing now. For right now, at least, what I'm doing is beginning, and it's not going to be every post. Like you likely, most of you, unless you follow me with a magnifying glass, will not know which ones these are, unless you have a really good memory. But they're going to be super spread out. Like I'm going to find creative ways to keep them lively and relevant to what's going on now. But the cool part, especially with all the content I create, is pretty evergreen, meaning like I can talk about it 2 years ago. I can probably talk about it 3, 4, 5 years from now, because it's the fundamental truths around social media, content, marketing, all that sort of stuff. So that's the good part there. So that's the second piece that I'm going to be doing, is finding ways to repurpose content. I definitely have more ideas, and this is where I have to kind of tell myself to step back. Like, hey, Jonathan, before you bite off more than you can chew again and get yourself in this predicament again, just find the easiest way to repurpose content. And honestly, it's just taking what I did in the past, making it better, optimizing, tweaking it, maybe using a different analogy, and then using that for content again. The other ideas I have is eventually maybe creating those those posts into carousels or repurposing it into short form video, things like that, finding other ways. But before I begin doing that, I just need to find ways to give myself more margin and just do this really well. And then eventually I'll find, especially too, once I start building out a team and have support, things like that, I'll be able to find ways to maximize a lot of the content that I'm already doing. So that's the second piece. The third piece that's really going to help me with burnout and hopefully help you as well as you go through your journey is lowering expectations. I am somebody who is very picky about so much, like to a fault. Like, in my work life, business, but also too in personal life, and that doesn't always work in my favor, especially in marriage, especially with families and friends. Because the reality is we're all human. Like, we're not robots. We can't just be perfect and knock it out of the park every single time. And that's the same view I've had with my own content. I've had really high expectations. So now I'm having to lower my expectations with a caveat, though, is I need to lower my expectations to understand that I don't need to hit a home run every day. Like, meaning the post I have every single day needs to be like the most magnificent post of all time. And instead be okay that sometimes I'll hit singles, sometimes I hit doubles. And the reality is you don't need home runs only to win a game. You have, bunts, you have the singles, doubles, home runs, stuff like that. And that's what my content is going to look like as far as a cadence. Some, like, if you look, this is specifically relates to my personal brand on LinkedIn. Let's say because I post 7 days a week. Maybe 2, maybe 3 of those posts are going to be like hitters. I'm like, okay, this has legs. This will likely resonate. But then there's going to be some of those in between where I'm like, okay, I know that this still has legs. This still has opportunity to be able to, do really well. But I just won't go as in depth on these. And that's okay. And the quality of the content will still be there. It's just maybe the in-depth aspect of it may be different per post. So that will help a lot from a content perspective. And the surprising part is some of my posts that are actually shorter, some of my posts that I actually put less effort into sometimes go viral, sometimes go, get a ton of engagement. And so for me, I'm like, okay, if that can be true about short form, maybe less time that I allocate towards this content, but it still doesn't mean it can't resonate within the audience. I can figure out a good cadence, a good rhythm of both. That way I'm giving myself margin and breathing room for that. So that's the third thing. The fourth thing, which I've already mentioned already, is I'm just stopping all networking and picking my brain calls. So for those of you that maybe ask questions or want to hop on a call, things like that, I'm declining them all. And I'm not doing this because I want to be a jerk. Honestly, I feel awful saying no. I'm like, man, I would love to. I'd love to help. And I just love helping. But my wife is always like, okay, you're not helping yourself by always trying to help everybody else. And my wife is way more wise than I am in this specific regard. So I'm saying no to all networking, picking my brain calls right now. However, the caveat here is depending on when I have this video go live, I'm making a post where I'm likely going to be doing a monthly Q&A where anybody can ask me any questions about personal brand, marketing, content creation, and anything in between, anything around marketing and that umbrella. You can ask me any question. The reality is I don't know everything about marketing. So if I don't know, I'll tell you I don't know. But as it relates to like social media, copywriting, content creation, personal brand, video, podcasting, like I would love to share as much knowledge I can. And the reason I'm doing this, I'm going to be approaching it this way, is I can help more people in this way. And obviously that content can eventually be reformatted for this specific podcast and leveraged here as well to be able to answer questions that maybe you don't need my specific insight, but you want insight on it specifically. The next thing is I give myself a 24-hour social media break once per week. And I've been doing this for some time now, and it's hard. It is hard because I always want to check. I always want to wake up and check to see where everything's at and engage with other people's content. But I know that I need breaks. Like I need these breaks. And so I've been doing it for some time now, but I'm going to continue to do this is a 24-hour social media break once per week. Typically, the way I have it scheduled with my wife is from 6 p.m. on Saturday to 6 p.m. on Sunday. I am not on social media. I'm not online. I'm not working on it. I completely unplugged from any sort of work, any sort of content. And like basically, I'm just like off of it. And that helps. And sometimes I'm like, I kind of want to stay in this a lot longer. And that's where, obviously I need a vacation. And that's another thing I'm going to mention. But the reality is, I think that's going to help me is just like disconnect from everything, disconnect from the noise, give myself margin to just breathe, to just not say anything, not need to read anything, just be myself and be okay with that. The last two things are so the second to last thing is I'm going to begin doing likely more of these solo episodes. And this kind of ties back to the burnout thing. Is I realized a few weeks ago, I was like messaging different people for guests. Like I'm not good at right now at scheduling a lot of guests out far in advance. I kind of do it more last minute, and I'm like, oh, I need content, or I need to like, and I was just kind of chasing the next guests and things like that. And although I want to have a tons of awesome guests on the podcast to be able to talk about content, marketing, personal brand, social media, all that sort of stuff, the reality is I realized it was kind of like I was just chasing the next thing, and it just wasn't life-giving at all. And although I want to have these super meaningful, life-giving conversations with these individuals, the reality is it was more taxing on me mentally and all that sort of stuff, and from a content perspective, than it was life-giving. And so I'm like, okay, the cool part I liked about, even though maybe I did have to allocate like 8 to 10 hours for those individual 5 to 7 minute videos, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to try out a solo episode, talk about a specific topic, go into, specific learnings and findings and share that with the audience, see what that's like. So this is my first attempt. Obviously would love to hear your feedback if this is helpful or if you like this format. Because it just helps me. One, it just makes this process easier, but there's a lot of things that honestly I want to share that are less structured the way I had the other videos. Because the other videos, and I just recommend you guys to go check out at least 1 or 2 of the videos, just to get an example of what I first started off creating. They were more structured, scripted, things like that. They had a tons of value. I tried to pack as much value as I could in there, but I realized in general, I kind of like this very conversational approach to content marketing and content creation, social media content, all that sort of stuff. And that's what I'm doing now. So instead of chasing the next guest, which the good news is I have really good guests coming up in the queue, I'm going to begin doing these solo episodes. That way I build margin. Like, hey, I don't have to have a guest every single week. And I have takeaways or things I'm learning, or maybe things I'm learning from my client side or my personal brand side, or other creators I've been studying, and takeaways, things like that might be helpful for you guys, for the audience. And so that's my plan with this process, to be able to do this more solo episodes and talk about specific topics, answer questions, things like that. So thanks again. At least I'm not quite done yet, but I'm just saying thanks for obviously hanging in there with me up to this point, because yeah, this is very new to me, this whole process, talking directly. My wife's currently not home, and I'm just here talking to myself into a mic, into a camera. So this is a very new experience. And the last piece, which I don't even have to spend much time on, is hopefully taking a vacation within the next few months, ideally within the next month and a half. I think that's going to be a huge benefit, at least a week off, which I haven't had a week vacation in years now. So that sounds good. So hopefully that will help, and I'll take a little break and then come back, hopefully more energized than ever, to create more, better, consistent, quality content. So yeah, so that is the story as far as, like I said, how I came about this whole idea of like content creation burnout with Vanessa Lau's video, my actual story that kind of led me to this point of wanting to quit it all and give up on it. And then also too, kind of more practical, hey, here are ways that I can find ways to optimize, create more margin in my life from a content creator standpoint, but without compromising quality. Because that's the biggest thing, is even though there are going to be these tweaks and things, maybe hacking the system to create more margin for myself, I want you guys to know that the quality content that I'm going to be putting out, it's still going to be high quality content. That will never change. Because for me, the reality is like, I'd rather not post anything than to post mediocre or crappy content, to be honest. So yeah, just know that the content you guys will see, it still will be quality. It will just be, I'll be leveraging these different strategies and tactics, to be able to optimize for that. So to be able to close out this first solo episode with you guys today, I want to be able to answer a question that I got on LinkedIn from an individual, and I won't say who it is just to not disclose. I didn't tell him I was doing this, but I think it would be awesome, and I think there's a lot of relevant insight that I might be able to share with you guys today. So here's a question. He says, Jonathan, what's up, dude? I know it's been a hot minute since we've talked, and I was hoping to pick your brain for a second. I have finally begun my journey of writing posts and articles to help get my credibility built up and get my foot in the door of the construction content scene. I just started posting this week, but have gotten very little engagement on my posts. I was just curious to see if you had any thoughts on what I could maybe do differently. Any advice you can offer would be much appreciated. Thanks, man. I hope all is well with you. Organic social media content takes time. It takes a lot of time. And content creation is really hard. I'd already listed off reasons why it's really hard. And for those of you that actually are practitioners and create a lot of your own content, you'll definitely understand this reality that it is really tough. I mean, think about how on the brink of burnout I've been as a result of what I've been doing from a content creation standpoint. So I wish it was easy. I wish I could get results right away. I wish I could get tons of likes. I wish the algorithm gods would just shine on me and just give me all the likes, shares, comments, all the notoriety, all these sort of things. But the reality is that's not how social media works. Specifically organic social media. You can't go the paid route, pay Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, to be able to get reach. But the reality is if you want to build on social media, you have to go the organic way. The other thing I want to say is when I first started creating content, and this is for months, I was posting 5 days a week and I was getting 0 to 2 likes per post. And the funny part here is that most of those posts were liked by my wife. So thank you for liking my posts. At least I have one supporter. And for me, I just remember being in the mindset of, I'm like, hey, I'm putting content out there. Why do I not have likes? This is really good content. Why are people not commenting? Why are people not resharing this? And when I took a look back at all my content when I was preparing for a personal brand workshop I did last year, I looked back at my content and I was like, dude, your content sucks, man. Your content's not that great, and it makes sense why people didn't engage. Because I don't know if I would either. But that's where I started. And so the reality, you want to approach content creation like investing in your 401k. You won't see a high return in the first year. Very likely you'll see your typical 7 to 8% increase. But if you're consistent and keep doing it, you'll start to see the snowball effect of the compound interest over time. Also, just want you guys to know that I am not giving financial or legal advice. This is all about content creation, but I just wanted to use that analogy that creating content, creating social media content, building your personal brand is like investing into your 401k. And you likely won't see a lot of returns from the get-go and be like, okay, is this actually working? Should I do something else? It's like, no. You just haven't given it long enough time to be able to look back and be like, wow, look at what it's built. And so for those of you out there that may not know me or my story, I started creating personal brand content on LinkedIn 3+ years now. When I first started, I got some engagement and then eventually just dipped off once I started posting a lot of content, a lot of mediocre content, and eventually pivoted and started creating content specifically for the commercial construction industry and started to be more focused and consistent with the quality, stuff like that. And my engagement started increasing. But the reality is I started at 0. I started at nothing, getting no engagement, and have built from there. And the thing to note with that specifically, actually, now that that's top of mind, one of the things I want to say is like, when you think about LinkedIn and when people create content on LinkedIn, it's typically when there's big milestones in their life. You think of like a new career opportunity, maybe it's a new promotion, maybe somebody wants to go more personal and say, hey, we're pregnant, or we got married, or all these sort of things. And what people end up doing when they post this type of content, they get a lot of engagement because these are big, huge milestones. And then what happens in these individuals' mind is like, wow, I'm a great content creator. Wow, I got a lot of engagement. Like, I'm made for this. Keep in mind, this person has never created content before, but because they made this milestone type content, now they think, oh, wow, I'm great at this. And so what happens? They start creating content and they get some engagement again. And then little by little, it starts decreasing because it kind of loses its effect. Like, you only have so many milestones in your life where, at this point, it's like, okay, what else do you talk about? And so what ends up happening, then they start creating content, doing it, they see the impact, and then little by little stop doing less and less because they're like, okay, nobody's engaging, and then eventually they just quit. And it's crazy because I see this happen all the time for people on LinkedIn. They post a big milestone, see tons of engagement, think they have this nailed down, realize how hard it is, and then give up because they don't see the outcome or the results that they want. So with this specific individual, and honestly, for those of you that are out there listening to this, know that it does take a lot of time. Know that you're going to have a lot of bumps and bruises along the way. You're going to probably doubt yourself a lot. You're probably going to get, potentially negative feedback, because that happens as you start to grow. Maybe some days you're going to have really good days and some days you're not. But I just want you to know that it does take time. And the overall thing is, if you can look back in a year and say, hey, like, I'm at least getting some more engagement than I was a year ago, I think that's trending in the right direction. Because the reality is, the longer you wait to be able to build on LinkedIn, because I know that there's a lot of people out there who are on the fence. Okay, I'm almost going to start. The longer you wait, the harder it's going to get, because more people are going to come into the content game. The algorithm's already changing for LinkedIn. It's actually becoming a lot more competitive. It still has good reach, but the reach is a lot different than it was 1, 2, 3 years ago, and even 5 years ago. And so the longer you delay, the harder it's going to be for you to build. So for those of you that aren't building now, start today. For those of you that are initially maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1 year into this process, stay the course, because I'm telling you, it has worked out for me. That's how I built my business. That's how I've been able to have opportunities to speak to executives, startup companies, be on podcasts, do workshops, like do all these things as a result of my personal brand. So I know if it works for somebody like me, it can definitely work for somebody like you. But the reality is, be less focused right now, especially when you first start. Be less focused on the results you're getting right now, and instead trying to find ways to improve the content, at least with every single post. And here are the last things I want to be able to leave with you guys, because I know that some of you will still want, will still want to know how to hack the system or how to grow fast on LinkedIn. And so I want to be able to share this. If I were to start on social media today and wanted to grow fast, here's what I would do. The first thing I would do is connect with 20 people a day. LinkedIn currently gives you, I think it's like 400 connections per month, and then they cap you at that. So I would try to find whether it's your ideal audience, if you're just trying to build an audience and trying to create content for a specific audience you have in mind, or if you're a business or business owner, maybe it's your target customer. And so regardless of who they are, or industry connections, maybe you're trying to build industry connections, regardless of which one or where you land with that, I would approach it from adding 20 connections per day. And that's obviously on average, that's 100 per week. And then the average month has 4 weeks. So that's, that'll get you there. And then the second piece, if I wanted to grow fast on LinkedIn, is engage and leave meaningful comments on top industry creators' content every single day. I realized when I first started on LinkedIn, and specifically in construction, a lot of creators gave this advice. Hey, go comment on the biggest creators' content, add some meaningful comment, things like that. But the reality is, like, when I was starting, there was next to no big creators, to be honest. And now what you guys see today on LinkedIn specifically has blossomed into something incredible and continues to grow. But now I think you have a lot more options than I did maybe 2 years ago when I started. So I just recommend engaging. Go onto the top creators' profiles, go click their bell notification, and then anytime they post, go like the post and go leave a meaningful comment on what they said. And over time, this is going to help you build a relationship with that creator, because the law of reciprocity typically comes into play here. It is, if you care about other people's content, it's likely that they'll at least give you the time of day to be able to potentially see what you have to say and maybe support what you're doing. So that's a great way to be able to get on other people's radar, all that sort of stuff, especially people who have a lot more influence online. The other piece is I would suggest, and I would give myself this advice if I started it over again, is start posting at least once per week and have it be a high quality post. So earlier in this episode or in this talk today, I was sharing how it's okay to not always hit home runs and hit singles and doubles. That's okay for somebody who's just who's already been creating content for some time now, has an audience, has a growing audience. Like that's totally okay. For somebody to start who's just starting off, you have to figure out, and you may not know exactly yet what the formula is for a home run type of post, but you have to begin thinking along those lines if you want to be able to get attention on social media. So instead of going for the 2, 3, 4, 5, like, because sometimes people are very hot and cold. They're like, hey, I just need to go jump into this and do it right away. No, the reality is you don't need to do that. What you need to do instead is figure out, okay, over the span of this month, let's say it's 4 weeks in a month, you have 4 opportunities to be able to make a lasting impression on people. So in my opinion, if you set that kind of bar for 4 posts per month, I think that's a lot more achievable than 12 or 16 posts per month that may be less impactful. And so some of you may be thinking, okay, Jonathan, like what type of content could that be? Here are 3 options that you have that perform really well on LinkedIn and just honestly across the board. The first piece are stories. So let's say for me with marketing, obviously I'm a content creator. I have a social media agency. I'm trying to help more people. So my goal is like, okay, I'm in certain situations every day where I'm talking to clients and in the past I've had more networking calls. I see things on LinkedIn. My goal is how do I tell a story about the topic around social media and the construction industry or commercial construction industry. Then from there, I begin to think back. I'm like, okay, well, I have this story, I have this example. The goal here is if you tell a compelling story, there's likely going to be a good chance that people are going to resonate with that because naturally as human beings, the way we're kind of built is we like and love and resonate with stories. That's why we love shows. That's why we love movies. That's why we like books, things like that, because we love a good story. So that's the first piece of content that you can create that can be really impactful. The second piece is a lessons learned type of content. So typically this may involve more like failures, things like that. But it's interesting because when you think of like a platform like Instagram, a lot of people post their highlight reels like, hey, I'm living this extravagant life. I just traveled here. I just did this thing. I went to this event. I went to this sporting event. I did all this. I have an amazing life. Great. That stuff does get engagement on Instagram. Awesome. But the reality is like we all resonate with more of the human aspects, more of the struggle, more of the, hey, I bumped my head into this situation and here's something that I learned. I think that type of content does really well. So this is more broad advice for people in construction, and this can be you can take this in any direction you want. But let's say you were like a project manager or even a superintendent and wanted to create content. It's like, okay, what was a really hard situation you had this week on your project? What was the situation? And then what was the outcome? Be it good or bad. Because the reality is like, if it's a good situation, probably have a lesson learned from that. But if you didn't resolve it, but now you have insight or wisdom on what to do better the next time, that's arguably just as important as well. So that's just one example. Obviously, there's maybe a lot of different people from different backgrounds listening to this podcast, but that's the way I would approach it is what lessons are you learning on a consistent basis? And I just want you guys to know, I do this every single day. I don't use any of this for content. Initially, I did to get ideas for content, but I have a lessons learned notes like tab saved, and basically every Friday at the very end of the day, I'll just take the time to write down 3 lessons that I learned that week. And I have several years now of lessons learned that I can leverage or focus back on. And so if that gives you an idea or maybe inspiration, maybe you have a notes app that says, hey, lessons learned. And at the end of every work week, you just write, hey, here are 3 conversations, or here's a situation that I ran into, or here's a mental light bulb that went off. Like just write whatever that is down and then leverage that into future content. Tell that story, like unpack that more. The last piece is talking about interesting conversations. So this is really interesting. I actually recently started doing this on LinkedIn specifically. Is I would like the post that comes to mind is a conversation I had with this construction recruiter named Zach Rose. Um, he shared some insight about a contractor he was working with, and I ended up making this whole post about that conversation and how interesting it related to social media marketing, obviously having a presence online, things like that. And that post did really well. Like it got really good engagement, got really good feedback. And I'm just like, all I'm doing is sharing the conversation that I had with somebody else online. I did keep his name out um, of the post initially, just so I just don't want to throw him under the bus. I didn't ask him to share this. So then maybe a pro tip there is if you don't want to overstep your bounds, just remove their name, redact their name from the post, but the essence of the post could still be there, like the nugget, the wisdom, all that sort of stuff. So sometimes a lot of the insight or content that you get may not come from you. And the last thing I'll say with this, so those are three pieces. So you have stories, lessons learned, and sharing interesting conversations that you had relating to your area of expertise. The last piece, though, which is typically where everybody starts, is educating. Like I would actually encourage people not to try to teach people right away. Because think about it like this. Like think about if think about the person at the mall kiosk when you're walking through the mall. Like let's say you're with your spouse or friend or family member, you're walking through, and then the individual behind the counter who has a whole bunch of cologne and perfume around them is like, hey, come here, come here. I don't want to go there. I know that they're going to try to sell me and tell me why I should buy their perfume or whatever, and I just don't want to do that. Versus instead, when you think of like a busker, like somebody who's busking on the street, somebody who's playing an instrument, like we're naturally just like, oh wow, what's going on? Like, and especially too if you see people kind of surrounding and engaging, like, oh, this is awesome what they're playing. Those two situations are kind of like educating somebody and trying to entertain or engage somebody in a way that actually lowers their guards down. So if you're creating content on LinkedIn or social media, building your brand, and you're trying to educate right away without actually having established trust, rapport, building affinity with your audience, you're probably going to grow your audience very slowly. And I made this mistake. I'm saying this from my own personal experience. I tried to educate people on these specific things and I realized it wasn't resonating. Instead, I tried to flip it on what the importance was, what my opinion was, stories, lessons learned, things like that actually resonate, because I don't have to legitimize or prove that my point of view is wrong or right. Like it's just my point of view. It's my lived experience. Like, people can argue with me all they want, but I just know my own experience. So nobody can take that away from you. Versus when you educate, it's like, okay, cool. Is this something I could have gotten on YouTube or Chat GPT, or just something I could have learned from a bigger creator, somebody who knows this more? So you don't want to bucket yourself in that position, because otherwise you're competing against a lot of other people. Now, however, I'm not saying that you can't eventually create educational content. I would just wait at first. Lead with stories, lessons learned, interesting conversations, sharing your opinions, things like that from the get-go. And from there, you would just repeat the process over and over and over again from a content creation standpoint. And that's exactly what I would do if I wanted to build my personal brand fast on LinkedIn. However, like I said before, it does take time. So I like the way Gary Vee puts it. He says, macro patience, micro speed. Macro patience, understanding that it will take 5, 10, 15, 20 years to be able to get the result that you want. But micro speed, knowing that every single day you're going to be focused and dedicated to making sure that you get there as soon as you can, and doing everything you can, knowing that it will take a long time. So that's just a good frame to be able to think of it from a content creation standpoint. So there you go. So I'm not sure how often I'll do this format quite yet. Maybe once a month, maybe, I don't know. Like I obviously I would love to hear your guys' feedback from this, especially if you enjoyed it. That will help me know what this format would be like. And maybe I just do one topic, because I know that this is kind of a longer video, and it's probably just because it is my first video. I'm trying to figure out the kinks. But yeah, just let me know whether this format is great. Maybe I answer other questions, things that you guys have, in the future. And even now, like if you guys have any questions now, like that you would want to ask me about my process or my opinions or things like that, feel free to leave it in the comment section or wherever you see this video. Just feel free to comment somewhere and just let me know what your question is. And in the next solo episode, I'll be able to answer some of those questions and hopefully make them a little bit more direct and to the point. I know sometimes I'm long-winded with things, which thanks for having grace with me or for me with that. But yeah, so that is all. Like I said, really look forward to doing more of these style videos. Hopefully, I actually have a lot more ideas on how to make this more and more interesting. Different ideas that I'm already chewing on, that I've been chewing on for some time now. But I'm just happy to have made this first video. Thank you so much for listening to me. And yeah, we'll catch you in the next one.